My name is Stephan Hochdörfer. As you can probably guess by this weird letter in my last name, I'm from Germany. I live there. I run my own company there. The company is called BitExpert. We founded the company 10 years ago. We're doing software and mobile development for our clients. I'm currently holding the position being head of IT, which means I'm responsible for all the technology-based decisions concerning our customer projects, internal projects, and the products that we build. I'll be here today and tomorrow. If you have any questions, this is my email address, this is my Twitter account. Feel free to ping me. That's about me. Who are you? So who of you has heard of the term dependency injection? Please raise your hand. Almost everyone. That's awesome. I'm talking about DI for roughly 4 years, and when I started my first PHP conference, or talking at my first PHP conference about DI, no one raised his hand, so it's really awesome to see this great adoption. Who of you likes DI? Okay, quite a few, okay. Who not? No one. Oh, just one, okay. To be honest, I'm really biased about DI when it comes to the DI topic. I'm doing it since 2005. So in 2005, we started to convert our own application framework into a DI-based one. And all of our projects that we are doing use DI as a pattern. So yeah, as I said, I'm really biased. We did roughly 200 projects in the last couple of years. I trained our devs. Help them tackle the problems and solving their problems. So I'm really, really biased when it comes to DI. I really like the talk title. It was really easy to come up with it. The content may really suck, but the talk title is really awesome. Just kidding. When I Googled for the definition of the 7 sins, 7 deadly sins, I came across a site that sells 7 deadly sins t-shirts. This is an HTML5 presentation, so this is a link to the e-commerce website. The site actually says if you buy at least 5 of these items, you increase your chance to get to heaven by roughly 100%. So if you made any mistakes in the past, you probably want to do something against it. Just kidding. I don't make any money from that one. That would be a sin. Okay. DI or IOC is really a cool thing, really a good idea. It's quite an old pattern. It exists like 20 years or so. And like any of these good ideas, you should use it with moderation. You should understand why you should use it, how you should use it, what the problems you can solve with IOC, and how to apply it in your projects. Oh, sorry. So IOC means inversion of control. So it's quite closely related to DI. That's a good question. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. Oh no, please do not ask because the talk is recorded. We'll discuss it at the end. Just kidding. So as I said, use it with moderation. Make sure that you understand what IOC is all about, how it applies into your project, and where you should really need it. Let's say if you write a database import script, 20 lines of code, you don't need IOC, obviously. Use it where it makes sense, and if it don't make sense, don't use it. That's the basic idea. So the talk is called The 7 Deadly Sins of Dependency Injection. Who of you can name the 7 deadly sins? Okay, I give a helping hand. We're talking about lust, we're talking about greed, we're talking about gluttony, we're talking about sloth, wrath, envy, and pride. Let's get started. So lust. Lust actually was originally was a term for desire, and therefore lust could involve the intense desire of money, food, fame, or power. Or in the case that I'm covering, dealing with too many dependencies. Let's say we have a controller that looks like this. So it's a controller class, it has an action method, myAction, which will return a response. Now, obviously, that's pretty boring code, right? It does not really do anything useful. So we start adding services, like, in this case, the myService. We inject an instance of myService via the constructor and use it below here in our action. We're running the code in production. Something is not really working. We need to figure out what's going on. So we add a logger. Again, we inject the logger as a constructor dependency and use it in our action. That's okay. That's 2 dependencies. We can live with that. But what if we want to add a mailer because we want to send out an email when do something failed or just some weird things happened. Well, we add the mailer dependency. And the controller evolves, we keep adding dependencies. At the end, we probably have 5, 10, 20 dependencies. Now that doesn't really look good, right? It really smells like there is something wrong in there. Now there are people out there who think we can solve this problem. We can solve this problem by using a service locator. Who of you is aware of the term service locator? Okay, awesome. Great. So instead of injecting the dependencies that we need in the constructor, we simply inject the container. And if you can look at the code, it's clearly that right now we just have one dependency. So our controller depends on the container, and that's it. But that's not true. Well, obviously it is true because we can see it here, but indirectly we still do depend on the service class, on the logger that we manually pull out from the container in the constructor. Now, if you look from the outside, we don't see what's going on, right? It's not documented. And from the outside, I mean looking at the doc block comments or the API documentation. We just see this constructor that needs an argument, the container. We have no clue what's going on in the constructor. And that's really bad. So this clearly violates the separation of concerns principle, because the class should not be responsible for resolving its dependencies like we do in this case. The class should just concentrate on its core business values, right? Doing the stuff that the class should do. Second, we've added a dependency to our framework, the container over here, which is really bad because your classes in an ideally world should not depend on framework classes. And third, we just pull out something from the container, something that is identified by a string, service and logger. Ideally, it's exactly the service that we expect. Ideally, it's exactly the logger instance that we get back. But maybe we just get back some integer or a string or whatnot. So we need to explicitly check what we get back and if that matches our needs. And that's really stupid. We should avoid that. So that's not really the best idea of doing things, but it can really get worse. So there are frameworks out there or the I frameworks, who implement these aware interfaces, which basically means that any of my class can, in this case, implement the ContainerAware interface, which defines a setContainer method, which will be called implicitly by this DI framework whenever an instance of my controller gets created. And this ContainerAware method just says, inject this container into my instance. Now this is really, really worse. In the other example over here, the container was a constructor argument. So I know when I create the controller, I have to pass the container. So in this example, it is a constructor argument, so I know that I have to pass it when I create the instance. When I use the aware interface, I have no clue that I need to call the setContainer method before I can execute or call the myAction method. Otherwise, the dependencies are not set. I don't know that. And this is really, really bad. So you need to clearly communicate that. So for that reason, please do avoid this ContainerAware stuff. And Toby, like in September, tweeted this awesome statement, ContainerAware is the new singleton. And I hope you guys don't use any singletons. Who is still using singletons? Yeah, no one's raising their hand. Oh, one, okay. I'm sorry for you. So singletons are really bad, and ContainerAware as well. Second, as I said before, we should try to establish boundaries, right? We should not really depend on framework classes. Yeah, establish boundaries. Make sure your application is separated from the framework. So in the very best case, you can take your application, put it on top of a different framework, and it just will work. I know this sounds like some really fancy stuff, but it can be possible in some ways. So greed. Greed is a desire to acquire or to possess more than one needs, especially with respect to material wealth. What do I mean with that? Well, I'm talking about classes that are greedy, that need a lot of dependencies. Now, this does not only apply to controllers, this just does apply to almost all different types of classes. But in controllers, it's quite common. We can use a service locator instead because we don't want to have 10, 20, 30 dependencies. and use a service locator just to have one, but this is really stupid. If this is the only reason for you using a service locator, you're doing it wrong. So if you take a greedy controller, or a fat controller, or a fat anything class, restructure it. It's okay to have multiple classes. Don't be afraid of too many classes. I know there are a lot of people out there who think that we are still living in this world where just one class is enough. But IDEs today are really able to cope with many classes, and you should too. So just going back one slide. So in this case, we have this user controller. And there are some people out there who think that a user controller should cover anything that is related to a user, like creating a user, registering, forgot your password, creating orders, creating comments, I don't know. So you got a user controller that does almost anything, everything, which is stupid. What you should do instead, oh bloody hell. What you should do instead is, restructure your controllers. Use multiple of them. Use controllers for specific reasons. Use a controller for authentication. Use a controller for the user management part. Use a controller for the order management. So think differently, right? The user is not the central piece of your application in most cases. It's all the other stuff that you do. The user is just the guy executing things. So point is, architecture and structure are really agnostic of tools. So if you use a framework that forces you into thinking into a specific structure, try to get rid of it. So the framework should not limit yourself into a certain structure. There's the application and the model of the domain and things like that. That should force you to think in a certain structure. And do not blame DI that you have to deal with so many dependencies, right? DI is not the problem. I'm sorry, it's your problem. You're doing it wrong. Just rethink your architecture, rethink your structure of the application, rethink how the different classes, objects communicate with each other, and all these things. So DI is not really a problem. It really helps to solve these problems. And oh, that works pretty good. And the service locator that you've seen before doesn't really fix it. It helps you to hide these problems, right? It looks like it's just one dependency, but it's not. You're pulling that stuff out, which is really bad. So this is one part of the greediness. The other part is you should always think what is really needed in my specific use case. What kind of dependencies do I really need, and how do I communicate with these dependencies? That sounds terrible, but I'll try to explain. So in this case, we have a login controller that has a dependency which is called auth service, which is an implementation. Now this is bad because we are depending on a fixed class, a fixed implementation, in this case the auth service. Now there's a guy named Uncle Bob, Robert C. Martin, who came up with the dependency inversion principle. Which basically says that high-level modules should not depend upon low-level modules. Both should depend on abstractions. Abstractions should not depend upon details. Details should depend on abstractions. This is really high-level speak for this. So instead of depending on a concrete implementation like we did before, the auth service, we just depend on the auth interface. This is all the login controller needs to know. The login controller does not need to care about how the specific implementation of this auth interface is done, right? So the login controller does not need to know that we authenticate the user against a web service, a SOAP service, an LDAP system, whatnot. All the login controller needs to know is we have this auth interface. This auth interface provides just exact one method, which is called login. The login method accepts two parameters, username and password, and it will return true or false. This is all the login controller needs to know and needs to be aware of. So the concrete implementation doesn't really matter. That's the main point. So that was greediness. Next up is gluttony. Gluttony is the overconsumption of anything to the point of waste. So gluttony can be interpreted as selfishness, essentially placing with one's own interests above the well-being or the interests of others. This is really one I really like, and I'm really happy that it's recorded. I'm talking about too many implementations. Who of you knows Composer? Awesome. Okay, who of you uses it? Same amount of hands, awesome. So I went to packages, I searched for dependency injection. I got 19 pages of search results, 19, which boils down to 285 packages. Now the search is not exact, so it will either search for dependency or injection, so there are some other packages around that do not cover DI in that case. Let's assume we have 150 implementations. Does that make sense? No, exactly. Thing is, 10, 15 years ago, when a developer wanted to show off his skills, he wrote a content management system. Who of you has ever written a content management system? Yeah, okay. Today, when you want to show off your skills, you either write a NoSQL store or a DI container. That's as simple as that. But what's the problem with that? Well, the point is, all these, let's say, 150 different packages do DI in their own specific way. So they have their own set of features, they react differently internally. You have no clue what's going on. So when you try to move from one framework, from one implementation to another, this does not really work. So I had the idea a couple of times and proposed to Fig that we should have something like a DI standard, but the guys did not really pick it up to now. Thing is that I really believe in this idea, and I have this dream. I really do. I want to pull in a dependency from Composer. My DI container should recognize all the classes in it, should pick them up, and I can easily access them as they were mine. So this is really my dream. Make it really easy to use external libraries and not really having to deal with the dependencies and how to wire things up and things like that. And for that reason, I think we need a standard. Luckily, it's not only me. Last December, yes, two guys created on GitHub a container interop project. So the project was started by David Negrier and Mathieu Napoli. And this is like pre-PSR, whatever, collecting ideas and thinking about how things should work. So the idea is that we define interfaces and define how the interfaces should be used, and take that as a basis and turn that into a PSR standard, maybe somewhen. So if you have any ideas or any requirements, feel free to join the group and discuss the stuff with us. Would really awesome to see that going live. Next up, Sloth. So Sloth has been defined as a failure to do things that one should do. And by definition, evil exists when good men fail to act. What I mean with that? Well, the basic outline is don't be lazy, don't take shortcuts, right? Solve the problems the right way. There are dependency injection frameworks that allow you to use property injection, which basically means I have a property in my class, have a doc block, have some annotation like add inject, and whenever the DI container will create an instance for me, it will inject the logger into the property. So I don't have to deal with it. First of all, I do strongly believe that public properties are really bad because I can set them to any value. It's like a global variable. I can easily access it. I can easily modify it. Which basically means that I have to check even for null values, or wait, yes, sorry, I got lost. So I have to check for null values in this case, just to make sure that the property is set. Ideally, I should check with the instance of operator to make really sure I get the exact instance, because obviously I can set logger to 5, which probably does not work. So public property injection is really bad. There are frameworks out there that allow protected property injection. which basically means I don't have a public property, but a protected one, the same way the annotation works. Thing is, to use or to be able to inject an object into Logger, I need the reflection API. I'm not able to access that field from the outside. I don't have any setter method for it. And as we all know, the reflection API is really slow, so we should not use it in production. And second, as I just said, we don't have any setter method. If I take this user controller and run it in my unit test, I'm not able to set the logger from the outside because it's protected. I can't access it. So that's really bad because I don't know it. I don't see it. As I said before, it's not visual from the outside, right? We have no documentation that there is a property in the code that needs to be set first before the code can be executed. And even worse, as I said, I can't even set it because it's protected. It's hidden from myself. So that's really, really bad. So thing is, don't do. Wait. OK, that one. So don't do it. Never, ever. Make your dependencies clear. Make clear what your code needs to be able to work. Document it. Make sure that you can take a class, use it somewhere else without the need of using the DI framework. So the basic idea of DI is really take the class and be able to use it anywhere that you like. So this is really just make it easy for anyone to pick it up and use it in your own projects. Most guys use this property injection just as a shortcut because most guys are just too lazy to write this setter method, like 4 or 5 lines of code. Instead, we just use an annotation, which also is like 3 or 4 lines long. OK, that's not really worth it, right? So yeah, don't do it. Instead, use something like constructor injection. Oh, wait. It's really not easy with 2 clickers. Yeah, use something like constructor injection. Define your constructor, define the dependencies there, that's good. If I want to create an instance of user controller, I instantly see that I need an auth interface. Just take your time. It's no big deal. What could possibly go wrong in this presentation? Just kidding. It's not against you. It's just my fault. So yeah, as I said, pass your dependencies as a constructor argument because there is a clear communication what you need to be able to create an instance of the controller and to be able to use it. And constructor injection in most cases makes sense because you don't want to change, like in this case, this auth implementation during the lifetime of the user controller, right? So I don't inject a SOAP authentication class into the user controller, and like 5 minutes later, I change it to a web service authentication class. That doesn't make any sense. So I inject it, it's OK, it can be used, I cannot modify it. That's the basic idea. And again, if you're using too many dependencies in a constructor, you're doing it wrong. Rethink your architecture. That's the base point. However, you can use setter injection in some more specific ways. Like in this case, we have a setLogger method, which is there to be able to inject a logger instance and use it down below here. This is used for optional dependencies, the stuff that I may or may not want to turn on or turn off. Like in this case, on production, maybe I don't want to have the logger for whatever reasons. So I don't set it in my configuration code. It won't be injected. It won't be used. It can make sense if you have an application that you customize and install for different clients. And you configure the behavior of the application via setter injection. Let's say you have an e-commerce site which, whenever you create an order, would post a message on Facebook. Social media as bad as it can get, but anyway. So maybe there are clients who like that behavior, so you inject this dependency in the order controller. There are other clients who don't like that, and you don't inject the stuff, and it will work the same way. So you can customize, let's say, runtime behavior using setter injection. That's the basic idea. If you use setter injection, do make sure that you have these null checks in place. Null checks, or if you want, instance of. As I said before, instance of might be better because you're checking for the type. So, yeah, as I said, null checks everywhere. That's really important. Otherwise, your code might blow up. There's another thing where setter injection can make sense, although you should not use it. Circular dependencies. Let's say we have this user service that needs something that implements an auth interface, and we have the simple auth service, which implements the interface, but itself needs, for some reason, the user service. Now, I cannot create an instance of user service because I'm missing the auth interface. I need to provide an implementation of that. I cannot instantiate the simple auth service below here because I'm missing the user service. So I'm not able to instantiate either of those and inject the other one into, well, anyway. So I can't solve this problem. Well, I can solve it with a twist. We can do this. So the user service still needs an auth interface as a constructor argument. But in the simple auth service, we changed the constructor injection to a setter one. So I can create an instance from that one, put it in the constructor, take the instance from here, and call the setter down there. So that's a way to solve it. But again, you get this circular dependency problem that you really want to avoid. Circular dependencies are really, really bad. There is a fourth option that you can use, which is called interface injection. Not all frameworks do support it, but a few do. The thing is, you can name your interface blah, 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 something aware, and the DI containers will pick that up. And whenever a class of your application implements the logger-aware interface, in this case, we need to implement it in our controller. And when the DI container creates an instance of the user controller, it sees, oh, wait, the user controller implements the logger-aware interface. That means I need to call the setLogger function, which we defined over here. So from a 10,000 point of view, this looks exactly like setter injection, because what we do is we create a setter method. But it's a bit more. It's like forced setter injection. It's implicit. It's like implicit wiring. Thank you. Which basically means that I don't need to configure the instance on my own. It's just the container who does it. Which, on the one hand, if I know what's going on in my container, is really an awesome thing. If I have no clue what the container does, I can really freak out figuring out what's going on. So you need to be aware of that. You need to be aware of that, what your framework is capable of doing. It can make sense for stuff like, I really like it for this logging thing, right? It's part of the framework will inject it, and I can really access it. I don't need to create the instance on myself, and that's it. Don't overdo it. It's like IOC, as I said before in the beginning, don't overdo it. Make sure you understand what's the purpose of this idea and apply it to your code, but don't overdo it. Yeah, next up, default dependencies. Let's say you write a library, an authentication library, and you want to share the library with others. Now, in this case, we have this auth service that needs an auth provider interface. If I would put this up on Composer and you would just download it into your own application, you would need to know what this auth provider interface is, how I need to configure it, how I need to inject it in here so that I'm able to use this auth service. It might be a bit too much. Now, this is a really simple example, obviously, but it might be a bit too much if you're using like a really large lib with a lot of possible dependencies and stuff like that. So it's probably a good idea to provide a factory method. We define it here. It's static. It's called getInstance. We create the auth service, inject, in this case, the database auth provider, which because we think this is the most used one from our users, and that's it. Point is that we've introduced tight coupling. Over here, this is a fixed dependency, right? We can't change it, which is okay in this case because we are shipping this code, right? It's our library, it's our classes. But on the other hand, you should probably think about separating the concerns, separating the class with its own business logic from a factory that is responsible for creating the instances. And this is an idea that I really picked up lately, and I really begin liking it because it clearly communicates what's going on, right? We have this factory which has the only purpose of creating the instances of the services. And on the other hand, we have the auth service whose only purpose is providing the business logic for the authentication part. Any questions so far? Am I clear? Thank you. Oh, yes.
I was wondering, what makes it better having two classes?
As I try to explain, it's really the instantiation part should not be part of the class itself, because the class itself should only focus on the business logic. So it's better to have a separate class just focusing on the instantiation part. That's the base point. It won't hurt if you put it up there. It's okay, but especially in this case, because you're depending on a class that you provide with the framework itself, because you're shipping this whole library part. It probably is a bit worse if you do this in your application logic, where you maybe depend on a third-party package, where you have no clue where that class is coming from. So in that case, it might be a better idea to use this factory approach, because then it's just a bit, off, so to speak. Next sin, wrath, or rage, as it may be known. So wrath is the only sin that is not necessarily associated with selfishness or self-interest, although one can, of course, be wrathful for selfish reasons. I really had a hard time finding a good example for that, so bear with me, it does not make any sense at all. Just kidding. Just kidding. Okay. One of these endless discussions on the internet, dependency injection container versus service locator. Can any one of you explain the difference to me? Yes.
DIC is a case of, this is what I need, give me it. And
exactly.
Is, here are all the things, take what you need.
Exactly, that's exactly the point. If we look how an interface looks like from a service locator, it looks like this. We have a function get, which gets an ID, an identifier, and will return the instance that is associated with the ID. If we don't find the ID, or we don't find an association for the ID, we throw a not found exception. To work around the not found exception, we have also a has method, which simply checks if we can resolve the ID, which return a Boolean value. If you have a look at the public interface of a dependency injection container, so from the point of view of a consumer, it looks like this. We do have a get method that has an ID as a parameter. The dependency injection container will resolve the ID and return the object associated with the ID. If we do not find the association, we return a not found exception. To work around the not found exception, we have a has method, which accepts an ID and returns a Boolean. Now you're laughing, right? Because it looks exactly the same. And that's it. From a interface point of view, it's really exactly the same. What's different is exactly what you said. It's what I call push versus pull. Like when I'm dealing with a service locator, I'm actively pulling out the dependencies, right? I need to write the code that pulls out the stuff. While in a dependency injection framework, the framework itself will push me the dependencies, right? So it will create an instance of my class, it will push the constructor arguments, it will call the setters that I've defined. So that's the difference. Yeah. So again, if I would use a service locator, I just inject the service locator, and I would actively call get. And again, I have no clue what's coming back. Ideally, it's exactly the service that I want. Ideally, it's exactly the logger that I want. It could be null. It could be a Scala value. I don't know. Right? Anyone could set it anytime. If I use a dependency injection container, first of all, I clearly communicate my dependencies. I say my controller needs my service and my logger. If you want to create an instance, provide me something that implements my service and something that implements my logger. In addition to that, as you can see, we have no dependency to any other framework or whatnot. So it's really just my code base. Really clean code, maximum code reuse. That's the point of view. Next up, envy. Envy is characterized by an unsustainable desire. Envy is quite similar to jealousy. And again, I really had a hard time finding a good example for that. But I'll try to manage. I want to talk about configuration types. There are basically two types of configuration for a DI container. One is internal configuration, the other one is external configuration. And I just want to outline the differences and why one matters and why you should probably both in your application, because they are focusing on different parts. They have just different ideas that may or may not be clear to some of you. So internal configuration basically means annotations. That's the only way that we can configure stuff in the code. So there are frameworks that provide an annotation that's called add-inject. When the dependency injection container tries to create an instance of all service, it will see that there is an annotation for the constructor. So the container will try to resolve the dependencies of the constructor, instantiate them, and then inject them while creating the instance of the all service. Thing is, in this case, it might be easy because we probably have just one class that implements this interface. But what happens if we have multiple implementations of the auth provider interface? Anyone an idea? Well, the whole thing will blow up because the DI container doesn't know which instance you really want to inject in this case. We can work around with that. And this is just randomly used, so it could be different in different frameworks. There is an add named annotation, which would define the class that should be injected. So anytime I create an instance of auth service, the DI framework will inject the REST auth provider. I don't have to configure it myself. It's just written there. But I'm not able to influence that. So if for some weird reasons I want an auth service instantiated with a different provider, it's not possible because the framework really takes the dependency in the add named annotation. There is another way what we can do. We can use annotations at the interface point. We can say implemented by, which basically means that the DI container will see, hey, we got this auth provider interface. And anywhere in my application code where I refer to auth provider interface, I actually mean REST auth provider. So it does not belong, or it does not fix the dependency to just one class, but to all the occurrences of auth provider interface in my whole code base. So that's even more explicit. And you're not able to influence that. So the thing is that annotations really focus on classes, not on the instances. So I define the injection types really on a class level. I'm not able to influence that. On the other hand, we have external configuration, and there are tons of examples. So this is YAML. There are frameworks that use XML or INI or PHP files or whatnot. So it's really up to you to pick whatever you like. External configuration is a bit different. First of all, I need to write a bit more configuration code. Like in this case, we say we have an auth provider that is implemented by the REST auth provider class. We have an auth service that is using the auth service class, and it has arguments. So the first argument of the auth service is the auth provider. So add auth provider refers to the definition over here. If I want to reconfigure that, I can do so. I'm really free to do so. Wait. Okay. Like in this case, we have different two types of providers. We got a REST provider, a SOAP provider, and we got two implementations, two configurations, an auth service REST and auth service SOAP. The class is exactly the same. What's different is just the arguments. So the REST auth service points to the REST provider, while the auth service SOAP points to the SOAP provider. So I tend to call it like virtual instances. So I really configure that stuff, and I'm able to use it even though the code is not there, right? So it's just virtually configured in this container. I just wire things up exactly how I need them and just pull the stuff out as I do need them. And so we don't need to have any child classes to do all the wiring. It can all be done in the container. So this is pretty powerful, but as you can see, you probably need to write a lot code. And most people don't like this external configuration stuff because you create a class, a PHP class, then you have to switch to the configuration file, add the different settings, switching back to the code, yeah, jumping back and forth. So it can be a bit cumbersome. Thing is that both do make sense. Probably it's the best to go for both, like using a mix of internal and external configuration. But again, you need to be aware of the ideas, of the limitations of each of the different ways, and yeah, choose whatever makes sense to you. As I said before, there are frameworks out there that use a PHP-based configuration, like in this case. That looks like a lot code, right? It's 13 lines of code. With these 13 lines of code, I want to express this. You probably don't see it in the back. It says new auth service, and then we inject the new REST auth provider. If I have to use 13 lines of code to express like a single line, the framework is doing it wrong. The framework should not be in your way, right? I don't want to write 13 lines of code just to express a single line. That's really stupid. So if your framework forces you to do that, you probably should switch it. Pick another one. So yeah. As I said, if the configuration is too complex, maybe you're using the wrong container. There are people out there who think that DI is slow, which I can say really depends on the DI implementation. If you use, if I use a configuration language like this, or if I use an XML file or a YAML file that gets parsed on every request and you use the reflection API to create all the dependencies, then yes, DI might be slow. If you are able to use a PHP-based configuration that looks like this down below here, where you really like hard code the different dependencies like you would do manually, DI is super fast because it's not more than just a normal object dependency chaining, whatever you call it. It can't get any faster than that. If you get code that works faster than that, probably came up with a better PHP implementation. I don't know. So DI is not really slow if you use a container that that supports stuff like that. Yeah. So last up, I'm pretty good on time actually. Pride. So pride is considered being the original and the most serious of the 7 deadly sins and the source of all the others. It is identified as believing that one is essentially better than the others, which basically boils down to this. In the first part of this talk, I really bitched about this service locator thingy, and I don't really like that. Thing is that a service locator is not really bad, or tight coupled components may not really bad in certain situations. be aware of the limitations, be aware of the things that you need to do, be aware of how to structure your code, and pick the right solution, right? No over-engineering. Don't do just too much just to make the code super beautiful. Make sure what is needed to get the job done. On the other hand, obviously, you need to understand DI. And as I saw, many of you raised their hands, so I guess you have understood DI. I lost track. Yeah, make sure that you understand how it works, for which parts it can be used, how it should be used, and learn to love it. Thing is that I really think DI is a different kind of lifestyle. It's about thinking how you manage your dependencies, how you structure your code, how to rethink about the dependencies of your code, and how all of that works together. We're almost there. The famous final words. It's actually the quote that I started my first DI presentation 4 years ago. Dependency injection is a key element of an agile architecture. Who of you is doing waterfall development? No one raised his hand. Thank you so much. So you're all doing agile, right? Scrum, Kanban, whatnot. Your own thing, whatnot. Thing is, we are living in a world that's going really, really fast, right? I mean, we are working for customers who come up with new ideas on a daily basis, which is good for us because it generates jobs. But on the other hand, obviously, we need to incorporate these ideas and these changes to an existing code base. If you think first, and this is again what I said at the beginning, if you think first and plan up front how a good application structure could look like, it might be really easy to add a different implementation and just use some configuration code to exchange it, and it will run. So it might be pretty easy for you to get changes in pretty fast in your code base and to react on changing customer requirements really easy, depending on your customer, obviously, which can be really hard, I know. It's probably another talk. Yeah, so that was it from my side. I hope you had a lot of fun, especially in the first part. I hope you learned a bit from it. And last but not least, this is the second time I gave the talk. Please do rate it. I'm really interested in your opinion. Tell me if I completely fucked up. Tell me if this was the best talk ever. Maybe it's something in between. I'm going for either end. Thank you. We do got time for some questions, so if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand or come to me up front. Yes?
I've always been confused by internal configuration.
Yes.
We spend the time building dependency injection and then hard code in the annotation what the dependency is.
Yes.
Can you give an example of a reason why you would want to do that and not simply a factory method or constructor?
I'm probably the wrong guy asking these questions because I don't really like the internal configuration stuff. Mostly because, well, let's see if I can get back. Whoa, where is it? Yes. I don't like it for the reason, I mean, let me put it the other way. Most people like it because it's right next to the code where it belongs to, which can be a valid argument. I don't like it because from my point of view, it's just hidden in a comment, right? I see it's a configuration, I can see it in the doc block, but yeah, it's connected to the code. So this is not really my thing. Obviously, it can make sense. It can make sense. It can make sense. I have no good idea. Just try to come up with an idea what could be useful for that. Yeah.
Does it negate the purpose of using an interface in the first place?
Pardon?
here you use the auth provider interface. You might as
okay.
well say REST auth provider instead.
Oh, yeah, okay, I see. A perfect question, which can generate a lot of discussions, which did in the past, and we will do so in the future. Thing is, you don't want that. that's the simplest possible answer. You don't want to depend on a specific implementation because you want to have a dependency defined as abstract as possible. As I tried to say before, for the auth service, it is not relevant that there is a REST auth provider out there. The auth service should just know there is this interface. It has like 2 methods, and the interface is like a contract. It's a contract between the auth service and anything I will ever inject in it. The auth service knows the public interface, it knows the methods, it knows the parameters, it knows the returning values, and both sides, like the auth service itself and the implementation class, like in this case the REST auth provider, have to adhere to this interface. It's a contract. If you violate the contract, something will blow up. And you can quite easily identify who violated against the contract, because it was either the auth service or the implementing class. That's basically the idea why you want an interface in there. I have still no good example for when to use annotations. No, I'm sorry. Yes.
Doesn't this kind of internal configuration make the code harder to test? Or the other way around?
Yes, I would think so, yes. Because if I go for the external configuration approach, oh, you're here. If you go for the external configuration approach, you can have a configuration file for production mode and a configuration file for the test mode. With internal configuration, you don't have the possibility for these two because, as I said, it's just hard-coded in there. So that may be a point where you can say it's bad. Oh, too many hands. I think you were first, yes.
So do you think, from your experience, do you think that test-driven development promotes better dependency management from the very start? From your own experience, does that make it easier?
At least you are maybe more aware of these dependencies and how to wire things up, where to put things. Yes, if you really come from this testing point and you need to mock objects, mock dependencies, this makes it really easy. If you're, yes, point. Yes, so one here, one there. You decide.
What's your framework of choice?
Our own one. If you ask me which DI framework I would prefer, I think in this case Symfony. I think they did a pretty good job. Since this talk is recorded, I won't comment on any other frameworks. Otherwise, some of my speaker friends might be annoyed. Yes.
I hate to sound like I'm putting another nail in the annotations, but you have to use the reflection class, right? Or the reflection.
Exactly, that's another downside, yes, obviously. To get, actually, in the current PHP implementation, as far as I know, you need the reflection API to be able to get the doc block and then just do some string manipulations to get that's out. Please don't write your own annotation library. There are tons out there. Just use what's there. If you want to really reinvent the wheel, just think of another wheel. Yes.
Hi. How do you feel about using traits to implement interface injection?
So far, I have not used it, but I plan to use it because obviously it makes sense. I don't want to write this setter stuff all over again. So a trait perfectly fits in that direction, I guess. So yeah, that's definitely the way to go. 101? Okay. One last one? No one? One last free answer? Okay. Up in the front.
Do you think this picture changes, what you've talked about changes when you get into levels of dependency injection? So everything you've shown, you've really had one level being injected, and that first level thing is being fairly simple to construct. So you can have things that you construct one thing that's got several dependencies, then you pass that into something else, and pass that into something else. Does anything that you've talked about change when you get into those kind of levels of complexity?
Not really, because you don't care, actually. So that's probably the easiest answer. Because I just say I need object X, and I really don't care about its dependencies. All I need to care is, all I want to care about is, first of all, the interface that I set up, and then the object that implements it. But the dependencies of that object, I don't really care. I know the container will pick that up and will do it for me. So that's really one of the key parts of DI. I don't need to focus on this whole object trees. I don't care about that one.
And you think sometimes when people get the greedy constructors, what they really want to do is to think things in that kind of multi-layered way?
That's exactly the point, yes. So instead of going like horizontally, you probably go vertically. Yeah, maybe. Or a mix. One now. Good point. So that was the last question. I don't think we have any more. Thank you very much.